Okay, so as you know from your research, on April 1st, the Israelis struck the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, killing 7 people, including 2 commanders. This is an act of war because the embassy is considered Iranian territory. And never before has this been done intentionally. And this follows the assassination of their general Qasem Soleimani in 2020, right? This is when the Americans launched a drone strike against him in Baghdad. And he was really one of the top Iranian generals. And what both of these incidents show us is that the Americans and the Israelis have dominance over Iran. So military dominance. So the first thing is they have technology, right? So technologically, America and Israel are so much superior to Iran. So that there's a jet that went from Israel and went to Damascus to carry out the strike. Now, if you did the research, you would know that the Canadian embassy is right next to the Iranian embassy. And the strike was so precise that it only hit the Iranian embassy and didn't touch anything else. That's a precision strike. That's how powerful the technology that the Americans and the Israelis have. But the other thing that's important is the idea of intelligence. So how did the Israelis know that these commanders would be there at that time, right? That's intelligence. And intelligence comes in 2 forms, right? There's the idea of human and then signals. Signals is basically, I can listen in on your cell phone. I can track where you go. I know where your car is, right? That's signals, electronic intelligence. The other is human. So there are spies in the embassy who tell the Israelis that this meeting will happen. So this is clearly military dominance that Israel and the Americans possess over Iran. And when this strike happened, as you know, the Iranians had to respond. And this was called Operation True Promise. And the idea of True Promise was that there's a strike package consisting of 300 drones and missiles that hit Israel. Now, what the Israelis say is that 99% of these drones and missiles were intercepted. They caused no damage. And the Israelis says, this shows that our Iron Dome system is amazing. We're amazing. Iran cannot touch us. What the Iranians said is that, no, we designed the attack to be harmless. We intentionally designed the attack so that it would not cause that much damage. So who's right? The Israelis or the Iranians? I want to make an argument to you today that the Iranians are more believable, more credible. And the reason why is that the Iranians have to be very strategic in their response to the Americans and the Israelis. And the reason why is the Americans and the Israelis have military dominance over Iran. But just because you have military dominance does not mean you'll win the war. So what I believe is that Iran and Israel are committed to a war. And it's possible that in 2 years' time, there will be a ground invasion of Iran. But it's going to take time to build up to the ground invasion. But just because the Americans and the Israelis attack Iran does not mean they will win. And the reason why is that, as you know from your research, in 2002, the Americans actually tried to invade Iran, okay? They ran a simulation called the 2002 Millennium Challenge. And the idea is, let's pretend that we will invade Iran and let's see what happens. So they divide the military into 2 teams, right? Team USA and Team Iran. Now, if you know anything about the American military, you will know that it is the most dominant, powerful military ever to exist in human history, okay? It is crazy powerful. If the entire world were to get together and say, let's go fight the United States, the world would lose. The United States has the most powerful military in the entire world. And Iran, it's a very poor country. So the United States invaded Iran and they wanted to see what would happen. And it turned out that who won? Iran won, okay? And the reason why Iran won is the idea of asymmetrical warfare. And this is a very important idea that you must know if you are to understand this conflict. So what is asymmetrical warfare? All right, let's pretend that Jack and I are enemies. We hate each other and we want to kill each other, okay? Jack has armor and he has a machine gun. I have nothing. So in most battles, Jack's going to kill me, right? But let's pretend that I live in a dark forest. And it's really hard to see in this dark forest, but I've been living there for decades, okay? So I know this dark forest very, very well. So if Jack attacks me in this dark forest, then it's possible for me to win because I can set traps, right? I can play tricks on Jack. And that's the idea of asymmetrical warfare. Even though Jack is superior, because I'm inferior, I'm forced to be much more strategic in how I fight against Jack, okay? And so asymmetrical warfare means that as long as you can define the terms of engagement, as long as you can control how the war is fought, you will win. Let's look at what this means for Iran and the United States. The United States has these aircraft carriers, and they cost like $1 billion, okay? They're very expensive, but they're very powerful. Now, in a symmetrical warfare, what would happen is Iran sends its entire navy against this one aircraft carrier of the United States. And then what happens? The United States blows up the entire Iranian navy, okay? That's what would happen. So you don't do that, okay? You do not send your navy against an American aircraft carrier. What you do instead is you send drones, okay? Or drone swarms. So what they did in the Millennium Challenge was they had these suicide boats, right? Charging these aircraft carriers. And guess what, guys? If there's a lot of them, like 1,000 of them, you can't stop all of them. And if one hits, then your boat sinks. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? This is what we call asymmetrical warfare. Now, what's important to understand is that in asymmetrical warfare, you have to control how much resources you use, okay? So, for example, this aircraft carrier costs like $1 billion. The drone swarms, okay, a drone may be $1,000 for a real one, okay? But then you have fake ones that cost $100. $1,000 are these drones that blow up, right? $100 are drones that don't blow up, right? You have 1,000 of these, and then that's like $10 million. And then you have 10,000 of these, and that's another $10 million, okay? So it'll cost you maybe $20 million to blow up a $1 billion aircraft carrier. Okay? Does that make sense? And this is why Iran would win a war, because Iran would employ asymmetrical warfare, drone swarms against the American aircraft carrier. And the true promise actually showed us that the Iranians would probably use this strategy. And the reason why is that the total package, the strike package that the Iranians use costs about $10 to $30 million. But how much money did the Israelis spend to bring down these drones? Do you guys know? How much did it cost the Israelis to defend themselves against this attack? Okay. It was at least $1 billion. Okay. Do you understand? All right. So this shows us that in a war, Iran would use asymmetrical warfare. And even though Israel and the United States have military dominance, they may not be able to win this war, okay? Okay, so does this make sense so far? Any questions about this? Okay, that's a really good question, okay? And the question really is, okay, listen, the Iranians will use this asymmetrical warfare strategy against the Americans. And so shouldn't the Americans respond with more strategic thinking? And that's a great question. And the answer is the Americans would not do that. Why not? Why is it that asymmetrical warfare is so effective against empires and dominant military powers? What's the problem of empires usually? What is their biggest problem? What is their fatal flaw? Okay, they have too much bureaucracy, but Iran also has bureaucracy. But the empires have a much bigger problem, okay? Now let's go back to the Millennium Challenge. Now, in the first test, in the first battle, Iran won against the United States, right? So what did the United States do? And do what? They did it again. They did a second simulation. In the second simulation, what did they do? Exactly, okay? What the Americans said is, nope, this is cheating, guys. Did you understand? Asymmetrical warfare is cheating. You cannot cheat. And then the Americans won. Does that make sense? So remember, in the first instance where you are allowed to use asymmetrical warfare, the Iranians won. In the second instance, the Americans said, no, asymmetrical warfare is cheating. So you're not allowed to use asymmetrical warfare. You must fight us directly. And the Americans won. What does this tell us about the American military? Exactly. Thank you. Okay. They are inflexible. Empires are inflexible. And the reason why is the idea of hubris, right? If you're an empire, you refuse to admit your failings and faults. You become very stubborn, okay? So it's back to the example of Jack has his machine gun, his armor, right? He comes into the Dark Forest thinking like, I'm invincible. And like everyone's like, Jack, don't go into that dark forest. It's stupid. But Jack's like, no, I have a machine gun. I don't care. So that's the situation. That's why asymmetrical warfare is so effective, because it allows you flexibility and creativity, and the empire, the dominant power, refuses to be flexible and creative. Okay? Does that make sense?